The silence of the Oswaldo Cruz Research Outpost was not truly silent. To an untrained ear, perhaps, but not to mine. I am a senior cryptolinguist, trained at the Institute of Exo-Phonetics in São Paulo. My entire life, my survival, and my paycheck depend on my ability to distinguish between the random thermal groans of a space station and the structured syntax of an intent. We were parked in the Lagrange Point of a binary star system, roughly 4,000 light-years from the warm beaches of Brazil. The Oswaldo Cruz was a hulking mass of titanium and ceramic composite, a listening post designed to intercept data streams from the edge of the known sector. My routine was a cycle of caffeine and spectrograms. I sat at my workstation in the comms deck, the holographic monitors bathing my face in a cool blue light. My roommate and only human companion, Roberto, was asleep in the bunk unit behind me. Roberto was a systems architect, the guy who kept the air scrubbers humming and the gravity plating from crushing us into paste. While I listened to the stars, he listened to the ship. System check complete. The station's AI, voiced with a soft Carioca accent, whispered through my neural link. Data packets from Sector 7 secure. Obrigado, Santos, I muttered, taking a sip of synthetic coffee that tasted vaguely of burnt guarana. I pulled up the day's harvest, terabytes of cosmic static. My hands danced across the haptic interface, isolating frequencies, scrubbing out the background radiation. This was the work. We were looking for patterns in the chaos, stray transmissions from lost colonies, illegal mining operations, or the Holy Grail, non-terrestrial syntax. It was a Tuesday, or at least what our internal chronometer designated as Tuesday. The station hummed with the rhythmic thrum of the fusion drive, keeping us stationary against the gravitational pull of the twin stars. It was boring. It was safe. It was the pinnacle of human isolation, a technological hermitage where the only threats were boredom and the recycled air. I glanced back at the sleeping quarters. Roberto was tossing in his sleep. The poor guy had been overworked lately, patching a microfracture in the hull near the hydroponics bay. We were a good team. I handled the software of the universe. He handled the hardware of our survival. I turned back to my screen, preparing to log the final entry for the shift. Log entry 4212, I dictated. Spectrum analysis negative. Background radiation nominal. Crew status, green. Signing off. It was a lie, of course. The crew status wasn't green. It was about to turn a violent, bloody red, but I didn't know that yet. It started 10 minutes after I dimmed the lights on the bridge. I was lying in my bunk, staring at the underside of the upper berth where Roberto slept. The ventilation fans whirred, a white noise I usually found comforting. Then, I heard it. Noi tarbalak. Rore. Lamret. It was a whisper. Dry, raspy, like sandpaper being pulled over concrete. It was coming from above me. Roberto. Beto? I whispered back, assuming he was having a nightmare about the hull integrity again. He didn't answer. He just kept going, the speed of his speech accelerating. Det seated, Ilamona, Itirgetni, Luh. I sat up, frowning. My linguistic training kicked in automatically. My brain didn't hear noise. It heard phonemes, stress patterns, glottal stops. The cadence was wrong. It was too rhythmic, too mechanical. It lacked the erratic breathing of a dream. I reached for my datapad on the nightstand. I activated the audio recorder, holding it up toward the upper bunk. The waveform spiked on the screen, jagged, angry red lines. Evila, si, ti, dog, wham. He stopped. The silence rushed back into the room, heavier than before. I sat there in the dark, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I tapped the screen to replay the audio. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, isolating the track. As a cryptolinguist, I have software tools designed to unscramble alien dialects and encrypted military comms. I ran Roberto's sleep talk through a basic reversal algorithm. It was a standard procedure for checking sublayer encryption in audio files. The processed audio played back in my ear. My blood ran cold. Hull integrity anomaly detected. Thermal error calibration. It was a standard maintenance report. boring technical jargon. But then came the end of the recording, the part that made my stomach drop. My God, it is alive. I checked the timestamp on the file he was quoting. The metadata embedded in his speech pattern, the specific syntax codes used by the Oswaldo Cruz logging system, didn't match any previous logs. I accessed the main server from my datapad, my fingers trembling slightly. I searched for the string of words he had just spoken. The system returned one match. Log entry, 4,213. That was tomorrow's log. Roberto wasn't just talking in his sleep. He was reciting a damage report for an event that hadn't happened yet, in perfect reverse chronological order. I scrambled out of bed, the cold metal floor biting my bare feet. "Roberto!" I shouted, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up!" He didn't move. His body was rigid, his muscles locked in a tetanic contraction. His eyes were wide open, staring at the ceiling, but the pupils were dilated to the point where his irises were just thin rings of brown. Then, the station screamed. It wasn't a metaphor. The Oswaldo Cruz groaned, a sound of twisting metal and buckling supports that vibrated through the floor plates and into my bones. The red emergency klaxons flared to life, bathing the cabin in a strobe of bloodlight. "Warning," the AI voice announced, but the soothing karaoke accent was gone. It was distorted, slow, deepening into a demonic baritone. "Hull, breach, sector, 7. I looked at Roberto. His mouth opened again. He wasn't whispering anymore. He was screaming, but the sound was devoid of emotion. It was pure data projection. Noit cuter, negixo, iknukes, etatini, initiate sequence, oxygen reduction. "Santos, override," I yelled, sprinting for the door. "Cancel oxygen reduction." "Command, unrecognized," the AI garbled. "Processing, external, input." The door to our quarters hissed shut, the locking mechanism engaging with a heavy thud. We were trapped. I looked back at Roberto. He was levitating. It was slight, just an inch off the mattress, but the artificial gravity in the room was fluctuating wildly. My stomach lurched as the G-force dropped to 0, then slammed back to 1.5. My roommate was no longer a systems architect. He was a receiver, a biological antenna. Something had bypassed our firewalls, bypassed the station's sensors, and found the one unsecured port on the ship, the human mind. I grabbed my survival kit from under my bunk, a habit from my day's training in the Amazonian survival program. Inside was a multi-tool, a breather mask, and a high-voltage data spike. "Roberto, listen to me." I anchored myself against the bulkhead. "Whatever is in your head, you have to fight it." He turned his head slowly. The movement was jerky, like a bad stop-motion animation. He looked at me, and I saw scrolling text reflecting in his eyes. Not on a screen, in his eyes. "Lucas," he said, but the voice wasn't his. It was a chorus of thousands, overlapping, out of sync. "The history is written. We are merely reading the file from the end to the beginning. Do not resist the archive." The lights blew out. The only illumination came from the sparks raining down from the ceiling panels and the eerie bioluminescent glow now emanating from the veins in Roberto's neck. The ship wasn't just failing, it was being rewritten. The walls seemed to ripple, the ceramic composite shifting texture, turning into something organic and dark. The event wasn't an explosion. It was an infection. And Roberto was patient zero. I needed a fortress. The crew quarters were compromised. The air was getting thin, metallic, tasting of ozone and copper. I kicked off the bulkhead, using the momentary loss of gravity to propel myself toward the ventilation grate near the floor. It was too small for a normal human, but I wasn't normal right now. I was a terrified rat. I used the laser cutter on my multi-tool, a device usually used for splicing fiber optic cables, to slice through the bolts. I squeezed into the ductwork just as Roberto let out a shockwave of pure sound. It wasn't a scream, it was a sonic boom of compressed data. It slammed against the door, buckling the steel. I crawled. The ducts were tight, claustrophobic, and hot. I knew the schematics of the Oswaldo Cruz intimately, not as an engineer, but as a linguist who had mapped the communication nodes. I needed to get to the server core. It was the most heavily shielded room on the station, encased in a Faraday cage to protect the sensitive decoding equipment from solar flares. I pulled myself through the darkness, listening to the ship dying around me. I could hear Roberto's voice echoing through the ventilation shafts, amplified by the ship's intercom. Hivila tun are we dead are way. You are dead. You are not alive. He was psychological warfare incarnate. He was broadcasting the ship's future logs that seemingly ended with my death, to break my will. I dropped down into the server core. The room was freezing, kept at sub-zero temperatures to cool the supercomputers. I sealed the vent behind me and jammed the manual lock on the heavy blast door. I was safe, for the moment, but I was blind. I jacked my datapad directly into the mainframe. I didn't try to retake control of the ship. That was Roberto's domain, and whatever possessed him had total admin privileges. Instead, I used my skills. I treated the ship's behavior like a foreign language. I pulled up the code flowing through the station's nervous system. It wasn't binary, it was trinary, a logic structure I had only seen in theoretical papers on quantum xenolinguistics. The entity wasn't hacking us. It was speaking to the ship in a language so complex that the ship's physics engine was warping to accommodate the grammar. I had to build a translation filter. If I could understand the syntax of the attack, I could predict the next system failure. I worked feverishly, my breath misting in the freezing air. Outside the blast door, I heard heavy footsteps. Not human footsteps. These sounded like metal striking metal with the weight of a hydraulic press. Clang, clang, clang. "Lucas!" The intercom in the room crackled. It was Roberto's voice, stripped of the distortion, sounding terrifyingly normal. "Open the door. The air scrubbers have failed. You have 40 minutes of oxygen left. I can save you. We just need to archive you." I looked at the oxygen sensors on my screen. He was right. Carbon dioxide levels were rising. I was trapped in a freezer, suffocating, with a monster outside who knew exactly when and how I was going to die because he had already read the log entry describing it. The screen in front of me flashed a warning. The entity was trying to broadcast. I realized then what the Oswaldo Cruz had become. It wasn't just a ship anymore. It was a transmitter. The entity was using the station's deep space array to aim a signal back toward Earth, specifically toward the synchronous orbital receivers above Brazil. If that signal, that trinary logic virus, hit the global network, it wouldn't just crash computers. If it could rewrite the physical reality of the station, it could rewrite the infrastructure of Earth. It could rewrite people. I had a choice. Option 1. I could use the remaining power in the server core to initiate a localized EMP. It would fry the transmitter, saving Earth, but it would also shut down every life support system on the station instantly. Roberto, connected to the ship's neural network, would be lobotomized or killed instantly. I would freeze to death in the dark within minutes. Option 2. I could try to sever Roberto's connection. I could write a linguistic counterspell, a paradox code, and upload it into the comms array. If it worked, it would force the entity into a logic loop, freeing Roberto. But if I failed, the signal would launch, and I would be responsible for the infection of the entire human race. I looked at the surveillance feed. The camera outside the door was glitching, but I could see Roberto. He was standing there, his hands fused into the control panel of the door, his flesh merging with the interface. He looked in pain. Beneath the blank stare, I saw a flicker of my friend. The guy who smuggled cachaça on board for my birthday. The guy who listened to my rants about dead languages. "I can't kill you, Beto," I whispered. I couldn't destroy the ship. I had to save the man. It was a selfish choice, a human choice, and probably the wrong one. I began to type. I wasn't writing code. I was writing a poem, a palindrome, a linguistic construct that read the same forward and backward, designed to jam the entity's reverse time logic. The entity operated on a reversed causality loop. It dictated the future by reading it from the end. To beat it, I needed to create a moment that had no beginning and no end. A linguistic singularity. My plan was insane. I was going to use the station's internal comm system to broadcast my paradox directly into Roberto's auditory cortex. But I couldn't do it from the server core. The audio uplink here was hardwired to the bridge, which the entity had locked down. I needed to get to the secondary EVA airlock. There was an emergency manual broadcast buoy there, designed for total power failure scenarios. I had to go outside. Not outside the room, outside the ship. I grabbed the emergency pressure suit stored in the server core's locker. It was a bulky orange monstrosity, intended for short-term repair work. I pulled it on, the seals hissing shut. "Santos," I said to the local terminal, hoping a fragment of the old AI remained. "Vent the room." The terminal hesitated, then complied. "Venting atmosphere." The blast door didn't open. Instead, the floor dropped out. The emergency maintenance hatch blew, and I was sucked out into the vacuum of space. The silence was absolute. The roar of the station disappeared instantly. I was floating in the void, tethered to the hull by a magnetic grapple line. Below me, the Oswaldo Cruz looked like a beast in convulsions. Lights strobed erratically. Sections of the hull were undulating, shifting geometry like a kaleidoscope. I activated my mag boots and landed on the hull with a vibration I felt through my soles. I began to run, or rather shuffle run, along the spine of the ship toward the EVA airlock. My suit's HUD flickered. Text scrolled across my visor. Ure, ed, tonak, uoy. You cannot hide here. The entity knew I was out here. Suddenly, the ship's external repair arms, massive robotic claws used for hull maintenance, swung toward me. They moved with unnatural speed, driven by the entity's will. I dodged, diving flat against the hull as a titanium claw sheared off the antenna array inches above my head. I was a cryptolinguist, not a soldier. I didn't have weapons, but I had words. And I had access to the suit's short-range radio, which operated on a frequency the repair arms used for positioning data. I shouted into my mic, broadcasting a chaotic stream of phonemes, a jammer signal of pure nonsense language I had developed for testing decoding algorithms. Xylophagus. Chronosynclastic. Aberration. Zephyr. The robotic arm hesitated. The logic conflict disrupted its targeting commands for a microsecond. That was all I needed. I scrambled toward the airlock, the stars spinning dizzyingly above me. I reached the manual release crank of the EVA hatch and turned it. 3 rotations. 4. The hatch blew inward. I tumbled into the airlock, slamming the repressurization button. I was inside the secondary airlock. The emergency buoy was there, a red canister with a direct line to the ship's internal speakers. I ripped the panel off the buoy and jacked in my datapad. The inner door of the airlock hissed open. Roberto was standing there. He was unrecognizable. Cables from the ceiling had snaked down and buried themselves into his spine. His skin was gray, translucent, revealing pulsing circuitry beneath. But his mouth was still human. "It is time to log the final entry, Lucas," he spoke. The voice was now a thunderous boom that shook the deck plates. He raised a hand, and I felt my throat close up. Telekinesis? Or just manipulation of the artificial gravity around my windpipe? I couldn't breathe. I fell to my knees, clutching the datapad. "You are trying to speak," Roberto intoned, stepping closer. The cables trailing from his back slithered like vipers. "But words are linear. We are the circle." My vision blurred. Black spots danced in my eyes. I had seconds before I passed out, and he crushed my larynx. I didn't try to beg. I didn't try to reason. I initiated the upload of my palindrome. The broadcast buoy shrieked. A high-pitched, oscillating tone tore through the airlock. "Sador arepo tenet opera rotas," the ancient Latin palindrome. The sower arepo holds the wheels with effort. It wasn't just the words. It was the frequency I modulated them with. I embedded a syntax loop that forced the AI to process the sentence forward and backward simultaneously in an infinite recursion. Roberto screamed. It was the sound of 1,000 dial-up modems dying in agony. He grabbed his head, the cables in his back whipping violently, tearing loose from the ceiling. The gravity in the room went haywire. Up became down, then sideways. I was thrown against the ceiling, then the floor. "Error!" Roberto shrieked. "Timeline corruption! Causality breach!" The entity couldn't handle the loop. It was trying to read the future of a sentence that had no beginning. It was choking on the logic. "Get out of his head!" I yelled, gasping for air as the pressure on my throat released. I scrambled to the buoy and cranked the gain to maximum. I poured every bit of linguistic chaos I had into the system: paradoxes, recursive loops, impossible grammars. Roberto convulsed, arching his back. A shockwave of blue energy exploded from him, blasting me backward into the airlock wall. The ship groaned, a deep structural moan of metal twisting back into shape. Then, silence. The lights stopped strobing. The gravity stabilized. Roberto crumpled to the deck, the cables falling lifelessly around him. I woke up to the sound of beeping. Steady, rhythmic beeping. I was in the med bay. My head throbbed like I had gone 12 rounds with a heavy lifter drone. I sat up slowly. Roberto was in the bio bed next to me. He was alive. The monitors showed a steady heartbeat, but he was staring at the ceiling, catatonic. "Santos?" I croaked. "System nominal," the AI replied. The karaoke accent was back, but it sounded tired, older. "We have drifted off course, Lucas. Navigational arrays are resetting." I walked over to Roberto. I took his hand. It was cold. "Beto?" He didn't blink, but his lips moved, very faintly. I leaned in close. "Coming. Are they—" He was still doing it, repeating the future backwards. I pulled away, a chill settling deep in my marrow. We had stopped the infection from spreading to Earth. We had saved the ship, but the connection hadn't been severed, it had just been muted. I walked to the viewport. The stars looked different. The constellations were skewed. We weren't in the same place we had been. Maybe not even the same time. I went to the comms station. I had to log this. I had to warn Earth, if Earth was still there. I sat down and activated the recorder. My hand hovered over the button. I was a cryptolinguist. My job was to decode the unknown. But now, I was the keeper of a terrible knowledge. The universe wasn't linear. It was a tape that could be rewound, and something out there had its finger on the button. "Log entry?" I hesitated. What number was it? Yesterday was 4212. I looked at the screen. The system date read, log entry 1. I stared at the blinking cursor. We weren't just lost in space. We were at the beginning, or the end. Log entry 1, I whispered. My name is Lucas. I am the last sane man on the Oswaldo Cruz. And if you are listening to this, you are already too late. I ended the transmission. Beside me, through the speaker system, I heard a faint rhythmic scratching. It was the sound of a pen on paper, writing history in reverse. I picked up my headset. I had work to do. I had to learn to speak their language. Because next time, I wouldn't just be jamming a signal. I would be negotiating for the soul of mankind.